Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ashley Allison, and I am grateful to be joining here today in our nation's capital to honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by calling on the Senate and the President to pass the Freedom to Vote and John R. Lewis Act. First, a note of deep gratitude to Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, the 180 partners working together to call on Americans to mark this year's MLK Day in the true spirit of the holiday by holding our lawmakers accountable to protect our voting rights. The mission of this coalition is simple: demand the Senate and the President apply the same amount of urgency and pressure to deliver infrastructure as it will to deliver our democratic right to vote. Last year, we saw Congress pass an historic infrastructure bill. We have long recognized that our country's roads and bridges are crumbling and in need of repair. But our democracy is crumbling too. It also needs repair. That is why, on Dr. King's birthday this Saturday, the Kings joined thousands of marchers and scores of local partners in Phoenix, Arizona, to march across a local bridge and deliver a message directly to Arizona Senator Kristen Sinema. From the podium, voter after voter delivered a clear message. It is not enough to pay lip service to the legacy of Dr. King and claim you support voting rights. You need to support a real pathway to pass the bill. This morning, we brought our coalition together for the annual D.C. King Day Peace Walk across the Frederick Douglass Bridge, where our speakers delivered the same message to the Senate and President. We are tired of waiting. We are tired of the talk and empty rhetoric. The time is now for the Senate to choose our voting rights over the Jim Crow filibuster. And now, here we are in Union Station, another beacon of our nation's investment in infrastructure, to demand President Biden and Congress deliver for our democracy as it has for roads, bridges, and train stations. At this urgent moment in our democracy, I am honored and humbled to be standing here today with Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, Yolanda Renee King, organizers representing our 180 coalition partners, and everyone tuning in from home, to say that we will not accept inaction from our elected officials on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, because there can be no celebration without legislation. And starting tomorrow, the Senate will vote on the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, a bill that will not only protect the ballot, but expand access to it. The past few weeks, we have seen what our collective power can do. In the president's speech in Georgia, President Biden urged the Senate to reform the filibuster, a Jim Crow relic, to get voting rights done. And we are honored that later today we will be joined by Speaker Pelosi, who has been a champion for democracy and a leader every step of the way. We have built the power, but we are still waiting on those who hide behind outdated procedures to avoid taking a vote. Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin have vocally opposed any changes to the Senate rules, even at the cost of our democracy. As Dr. King said in his I Have a Dream speech, we are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. We cannot afford to stand by while our rights are on the line. That is what you will hear today. Thank you for joining us, and I'm honored to introduce our first speakers. I'd like to introduce the King family to the stage. We are honored that we have members from Martin Luther King Jr.'s family here today, leaders of the Deliver for Voting Rights campaign. They made today's movement to honor Dr. King by passing voting rights legislation. First up, I am honored to introduce Dr. King and Coretta Scott King's granddaughter, 13-year-old granddaughter, Yolanda Renee King. She's an activist for voting rights and justice. She's the director of youth engagement at the Drum Major Institute. And on Tuesday, she will follow in her grandfather's footsteps by speaking at the National Cathedral. Yolanda?
Thank you to all of those who are here to honor my grandfather's 93rd year, the only way we know how, through action. I am the proud granddaughter of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. I am also the proud daughter of Martin Luther King III and Arndrea Waters King. Although I never got to meet my grandfather, his lessons and drive for justice are in me. Stories about my grandfather's leadership were passed down to me at the dinner table, told to me at bedtime, and shared during long road trips. But most importantly, his lessons are passed down to me and young people across the country during moments in history like this one that call for all of us to work together and take action to correct injustice and advance equality. One important lesson I learned from my grandparents is that no matter how old you are, no matter who you are, all of us can create change when we choose to show up and speak out. I'm speaking especially to the young people here today in Washington who have decided to show up on a Monday morning to speak out and demand their senators protect their future right to vote. Today in 2022, the right to vote is under attack as our elected leaders try to silence our voices. At just 13, I have fewer voting rights than I did the day that I was born. That's why my family has spent this Martin Luther King Jr. weekend mobilizing, first in Phoenix and now in Washington, to demand the President and Senate get voting rights legislation done. Our rights are on the line. And while I, like many of you, am not old enough to vote, this fight is personal for me. It's our future these elected leaders are deciding. It's our voices they are trying to silence because they know our voices are powerful. They may tell us hundreds of times that we're too young to understand, but those who try to undermine our power do so because they know young people will not stand down in the face of injustice. If you, like me, can't vote, just let me tell you about some other ways you can fight for the future right to vote. You can write a letter to Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin. You can call their offices and tell them that you want to see them choose your future over the filibuster, a broken rule that's been used to uphold slavery and segregation and block progress on civil rights. You can talk to your friends and parents about why this matters. You can keep showing up like you showed up today. Fighting for voting rights is about fighting for the right to participate in democracy, a movement my grandfather led many decades ago. But it's also about all the other issues that affect all of us: climate justice, reproductive justice, LGBTQIA+ justice, and so much more. We will not stop organizing to get this done. But for all the elected leaders out there who are tweeting, posting, and celebrating my grandfather, Dr. King, today, My message to you is simple. Do not celebrate, legislate. The Senate must do the right thing when this legislation comes to a vote tomorrow. Senator Sinema, Senator Manchin, our future hinges on your decision, and history will remember what choice you make. So join me in demanding action for today, tomorrow, and generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda, for that powerful speech. We're now going to hear from Arndrea Waters King, president of the Drum Major Institute. For decades, Mrs. King has been dedicated to serving humanity as a leader in the fight against inequality, injustice, and hate crimes. Today, she works to uphold the King legacy and encourage individuals to embrace their unique contribution to peace, justice, and equity for all. Alongside her husband, she is one of the co-leaders of the Deliver for Voting Rights campaign that gathered us here today. Mrs. King?
Good morning. We're thankful to so many who have made today possible, and I'd especially like to thank Speaker Pelosi for her fearless leadership in working to protect the rights of Black and Brown Americans. Thank you to Congressman Beatty of Ohio and Congresswoman Sewell of Alabama for fighting not just for their own constituents, but for all of us. Thank you to the hundreds of partners whose organizing has gotten us to this moment. And thank you to the Peace Walk organizers for putting together this morning's powerful march. America, we are at a fork in the road. We have two paths before us, one that leads to the nation the Constitution promises, and one that leads deeper into division and injustice. Since January 6, 2021, our country has bled from 1,000 daily cuts of racism, white supremacy, and disinformation. In that time, more than 400 pieces of legislation have been proposed, and 19 states have passed laws that restrict the right to vote. That is why we must eliminate the filibuster and pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act now. As Martin Luther King Jr. said in 1964, to maintain the filibuster is to harm the health of our nation. It was true then, and it's true today. The filibuster is not some time-honored tradition that must be preserved to protect democracy. And even if it were, what good is a filibuster when preserving it will destroy the democracy it's supposed to protect? Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin want a supermajority. Well, a supermajority of citizens support this legislation. They say eliminating the filibuster won't address our country's disease of division. Saying we have a disease of division but not restoring voting rights is like diagnosing a patient with treatable cancer and withholding the treatment. The filibuster is an instrument of division. As a mother who wants to leave a better world for the next generation, I feel the weight of the moment. Our daughter Yolanda is Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King's only grandchild. And I know that when he talked about his dream, he was also dreaming of her. She is just 13 years old. In 2013, when she was 5, the Voting Rights Act was gutted by a Supreme Court decision that said states with a history of racist voter suppression didn't need oversight anymore because racism was a thing of the past. In 2021, when she was 12, the Supreme Court toppled the rest of the Voting Rights Act, and her home state passed laws that make it even harder for Black and brown Georgians to vote. Today, Yolanda and her peers, children of just 13, have fewer voting rights than the day they were born. What would MLK say about that? Is that the dream that he held for his granddaughter? I asked Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema and all those who stand in the way of restoring voting rights, is that the legacy that you want to leave behind? Many have chosen that path before you, and there are stains on our country's history. After the Civil War ended in 1865, do you know how long it took our country to come together and overcome our disease of division to get it passed? 100 years. 100 years of filibustered civil rights laws. 100 years of Jim Crow. 100 years of poll taxes and impossible tests for black voters. 100 years of being so intimidated at polling places that many felt safer staying at home. If Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema maintain their position, they will extend white supremacy's short chokehold on our democracy and consign themselves to the same foolish legacy. Do they want us to wait another 100 years to have our rights restored? Is that the beloved community of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King? If so, tell it to the grandmother in West Virginia who waits hours to vote, only to find out she's been kicked off the voter polls and it's too late to do anything about it. Tell it to the elderly Native man on a reservation in Arizona who will have to travel 20 miles to vote, even though he doesn't have access to transportation. Tell it to the mother who will wait 10 hours to vote in Atlanta with her children by her side and her bag full of water and snacks because it's illegal to pass out food and water to voters. But we can't stop now because we've seen what President Biden and Senate Democrats can do when they commit. They delivered a historic bill that will improve our country's infrastructure, and that has me thinking about bridges. Bridges take you somewhere new and help you cross impassable terrain. This morning, as we walked in the rain and snow across the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge with our Peace Walk partners and the DC MLK Holiday Committee, and as I crossed, I thought about John Lewis and C.T. Vivian and Hosea Williams and Amelia Boynton. When John Lewis and those marchers crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma in 1965, they were trying to lead us from the scorched earth of oppression to the solid footing of freedom. Today, our nation stands on another bridge, and another dangerous threat waits on the other side. But we must not allow it to turn us back. If, as we believe, we are our ancestors' answered prayers, we must ensure that our descendants become ours. We do that by linking arms and forging ahead across the bridge of democracy to claim the future for all Americans. I'm reminded of a poem by Langston Hughes, a poem that my father-in-law recited to the students of Barrett Junior High School in October 1967. The poem is called Mother to Son, and in it I can hear all of those who marched before us, all of the years of prayers of our ancestors fortifying us now. Well, son, I'll tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. It's had tacks in it and splinters and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor, bare. But all the time I'm climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners, and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on those steps, because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall now, for I'm still going, honey. I'm still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stair. As in that poem, life for many black and brown Americans has been no crystal stair. And we will not allow our elected officials to add to the tacks and splinters while we climb. As my father-in-law, Dr. King, told those young people that day, you have a responsibility to seek to make your nation a better nation in which to live and to seek to make life better for everyone. He urged them to seek beauty and truth. If he were here today, he would look our leaders in the eye and challenge them with those same words. History hinges on the choices they will make. The tones of democracy ring louder than division. Freedom and justice for all. And no matter what it looks like, no matter how tired we may be, we will not give up. We will not give out. We will not give in. Whether this bill is passed tomorrow, next week, next month, or next year. And we already know what the end will be, because God always ends on all is well. And until all is well, it's not the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. King. Now we're going to hear from Martin Luther King III. As the oldest son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King III is a leader on the world stage, a peacemaker, a negotiator, and on some of today's most critical issues nationally and internationally, including voting rights. Most recently, Mr. King has taken over the leadership of the Drum Major Institute, with the focus on continuing the King legacy through campaigns like Give Us the Ballot. The work of the Drum Major Institute inspires and supports organizations and individuals to embrace their unique contribution to peace, justice, and equity for all. Alongside his wife, Mr. King is one of the co-leaders of the Deliver for Voting Rights campaign that gathered us here today. Mr. King?
Good afternoon. I too would like to thank so many who have embarked upon this journey with us today as we observe the King holiday. My father would have been on Saturday 93 years old. But first, let me thank Speaker Pelosi for her tireless commitment on behalf of Black and Brown Americans, as well as the Congressional Black Caucus Chair, Congresswoman Beatty, and also Congresswoman Terri Sewell from the state of Alabama, for constantly fighting for that which is right. And I want to thank every partner. Over 180 organizations have joined us, over 1,000 pastors. Every major labor union has joined in this quest for voting rights. But I want to thank every partner who made it today for the Peace Walk and all the organizers of the Peace Walk who understood the importance, not just of the day, but of this moment. And thank you to all of you who are joining us here today, and especially you as members of the American media helping to get the word out to American people. My mother always said the holiday should be a day on, not a day off. Today, we're not here to celebrate. We're here to be on. We're here to call on President Biden and the Senate to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act and to warn that our democracy stands on the brink of serious trouble without these bills. Last week, the president said he's tired of being quiet about voting rights. Well, we're tired of being patient. Since January 6, 2021, when the insurrectionists attacked our Capitol, 19 legislatures have passed 34 laws clawing back voting rights for their citizens. In states like my home state, where new laws, I should say of Georgia, are designed to confuse voters so they don't know where to go. They kick people off the voter rolls so they show up to vote and find out they're not registered. They close polling stations and limit voting hours so working parents and folks without access to transportation can't get there in time. These laws are being passed with knife-like precision to cut Black and brown voters out of the process. And they're exactly what the Voting Rights Act once protected against. That's just one state, but it's all over. Texas, Florida, Iowa, Arizona, the list goes on. More legislatures are gearing up to pass laws like these when they convene this year. And our Senate is letting them get away with it because of a little technicality called the filibuster. With the filibuster, a single senator can prevent a bill from coming up for debate just by sending an email. They can stop a bill from being debated, let alone voted on. This is why people say the Senate is broken, but it gets worse. The filibuster was used to stop civil rights legislation for 100 years after the Civil War. Now think about that. The history books tell you that after the Civil War, people who had been enslaved for 250 years were finally free. But that's not the truth. They had to fight for 100 more years before they could overcome the filibuster, just to have their right to vote protected. And now the filibuster is being weaponized again. The irony is that all these laws taking away our rights are being passed by a simple majority, while here in Washington, the effort to reinstate them has to get a super majority to pass. The good news is that we have the power to address the injustices. We can eliminate the filibuster with a simple majority and then pass this bill that every Democratic senator says they support. But as you've heard, a few people stand in the way. Not just Republicans, every one of them is taking an immoral position against voting rights. But that's not who I want to talk about today. I'm talking about two Democratic senators, Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema, who say they support the bill but refuse to eliminate the filibuster to pass it. They think the real problem isn't that our rights are being stolen. They think the real problem is a disease of division that can be cured with some optimism and conversation. Now, my father worked to bring people together in his time, but he was no Pollyanna. In his speech, The Other America, he talked about how some people were pushing back on civil rights because, like these two senators, they felt the problem couldn't be solved with legislation. They told him he had to change hearts first, and he worked hard at that. After all, he was a Baptist preacher. But he knew that when someone is denying you of your fundamental rights, conversation and optimism won't get you very far. He said, although it may be true that morality can't be legislated, behavior can be regulated. Even though it might be true, he said, that the law cannot change the heart, it can restrain the heartless. Even though it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, it can restrain him from lynching me. So let me be clear. When states are engaging in lawless voter suppression, only the law can stop them. Senators Sinema and Manchin also say if the bill doesn't get bipartisan support, it shouldn't pass. Well, the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenships to slaves in 1868, that didn't have bipartisan support. Should formerly enslaved people have been denied citizenship, Senator Sinema? The 15th Amendment that gave formerly enslaved people the right to vote in 1870, that didn't have bipartisan support. Should former slaves have been denied the right to vote, Senator Manchin? In 1922, 23, and 24, some senators filibustered an anti-lynching bill that had passed in the House. Would Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema have supported blocking those bills too? I'm just applying their logic here and showing that it's not logical at all. To them, the filibuster is sacred, except for when it's not. In 2010, Senator Sinema supported the idea of using reconciliation to get around the filibuster and pass health care reform. Just last month, they both supported an exception to the filibuster to raise the debt ceiling. But they draw the line at protecting the rights of millions of voters. history will not remember them kindly. In April 1963, my father was jailed in Birmingham for protesting segregation. While there, he wrote an open letter in which he said the biggest stumbling block was not the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. He was surrounded by people who told him to wait until a more convenient time and to use more agreeable methods. 59 years later, it's the same old song and dance from Senator Manchin and Sinema. But my father did not let up for a moment, and neither have we. More than 180 partners, over 1,000 faith leaders, and millions nationwide fought to make this vote possible. You are the reason President Biden spoke out last week and is swinging for the fences. You are the reason Speaker Pelosi has brought about powerful legislation and every procedural solution possible to protect black and brown Americans. You are the reason Leader Schumer set a deadline and is bringing the bill to a vote tomorrow. Organizing works, protesting works, and we cannot let up now. So no matter what happens tomorrow, we must keep the pressure on and say no more empty words. Don't tell us what you believe in. Show us with your votes. History will be watching what happens tomorrow. Black and brown Americans will be watching what happens tomorrow. In 50 years, students will read about what happens tomorrow and know whether our leaders had the integrity to do the right thing. Mr. President, Senator Manchin, Senator Sinema, members of the Senate, pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act now. If you can deliver an infrastructure bill for bridges, you can deliver voting rights for Americans. If you do not, there's no bridge in this nation that can hold the weight of that failure. Thank you. And now I have the great honor of introducing the leaders who believed in this fight from the beginning and who have stood by the side of black and brown Americans on voting rights. Speaker Pelosi has used her position of leadership to push from every angle to get voting rights bills passed, and we would not be where we are today without her commitment to our democracy. Representative Joyce Beatty, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, has been instrumental in passing voting rights legislation in the House and getting us to this point in the fight. Representative Terri Sewell has been a pillar in the voting rights fight and leading the House to deliver for voting rights just like they delivered for bridges. Because of the leadership of these women, the House passed this crucial legislation to protect our democracy, and action now rests with the Senate. First, please join me in welcoming the Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, the Honorable Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Martin. What an honor it is, personally and officially, to be here with the family of Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. and Coretta Scott King. To hear Yolanda speak about the future and what this all means to young people, how proud her grandparents are. And to hear Arndrea talk about what is at stake in all of this couldn't be more clear. And Martin, thank you for the challenge that you have put forth. It is my honor also to be here with some of the leadership of the House. The leader of the Congressional Black Caucus made it for us, working with Eric Holder and John Sarbanes and others, and Mr. Clyburn, to make sure this legislation, the Freedom to Vote Act, was passed. And Terri Sewell has been the author of the John Lewis Voting Rights Act even before it was called that. She's been for it for years and advocating relentlessly, and you will hear from them. Let me just say that to what the family had to say about the history and the prospects, let us just say amen. In Congress, we'd say I associate myself with the remarks. But I just want to add this, because I was always watching the King family from school and all the rest. In fact, I was at the march. I couldn't stay to hear the speech, can you imagine? Because I had to leave to go get married. That's why I can always remember how long ago this speech was, or how long ago I've been married. How long I've been married. But in any event, Dr. King, Coretta Scott King, and those who were associated with him included our beloved John Lewis. They believed in nonviolence. They traveled, the Kings, to India to study the Mahatma Gandhi principle of nonviolence. The word for nonviolence in Sanskrit, satyagraha, has two meanings. One is nonviolence, the other is insistence on the truth. And that's the message they shared with them, brought back, and the rest. And we are insisting on the truth. The truth is that what is happening in the Congress, and I give great credit to the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, for his relentless and persistence in trying to get this done, and to the president for his leadership. But we have to get this done. And the truth is that our colleagues, House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, must weigh the equities here. While it may be true to them that the filibuster is an important custom, it is not the Constitution of the United States, the truth is. And the truth is that the Constitution says only if you're ratifying a treaty, convicting an impeached person, or ratifying the Constitution, a simple majority. That's why the vice president can break a tie, 50-50. So the truth, we want all of them in the Senate to weigh the equities. We all want bipartisanship. We all strive for it. We have a responsibility to do so. But when we cannot have it, we cannot confine our democracy to what might be bipartisanly possible. So I ask our colleagues in the Senate, respectfully, for what they think filibuster means, to compare that, to weigh the equities against our democracy, because nothing less is at stake than our democracy. This is about suppressing the vote. It's about nullifying the elections, which Dr. King talked about that day, nullifying the election. It's about just doing so many things to be obstacles to participation. That's wrong. The truth is, that's wrong. And this family and John Lewis, and so beautifully that this bill is named for him, but the first bill, he wrote the first 300 pages of what is now called Freedom to Vote. And as has been indicated by the King family, this bill is supported by all of the Democrats, House and Senate. It's just the filibuster in a way. So in a way, if you really, truly want to honor Dr. King, don't dishonor him by using a congressional custom as an excuse for protecting our democracy. We have no right to honor this family, to visit the monument. Imagine 36 years old, left this earth in such a way that he has a monument on the mall, along with Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all of them with tears in their eyes for the departure from our democracy that is happening right now, unless the truth is acknowledged and this legislation is passed. And with that, I want to yield to our am I introducing? Our distinguished chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. Working with her has been a joy because she has been so persistent. She brings her own record of civil rights experience to the Congress and to this subject, as does our distinguished whip, Mr. Clyburn. Without her leadership and her persistence, we would not have passed that first bill, the For the People Act, which is now called Freedom to Vote. It was an honor to serve with her as well as with Terri Sewell. We are just so determined to make this happen tomorrow, and no one more determined than the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty of Ohio.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and thank you for your leadership. It is an honor for me to be here today and for me to be the chairwoman of the powerful Congressional Black Caucus. To the King family, thank you, Martin, Arndrea, Yolanda, for the peace walk that we just did, for keeping the dream alive and for deliver for voting rights. To you, I say thank you. But today we come to seize the opportunities for justice that lay before us now, because we cannot redeem the soul of America without the courage to fight the barriers of cultural, systemic, environmental racism. And at every turn, we must remind America that we have the right now. The right for education, the right for childcare, housing, economic and social justice. But what? It is all born out of the right to vote. That is why I have dedicated my life to connecting people, public policy, and politics, fighting for justice and civil rights for all. That is why I marched with this family. That is why I say thank you for giving us, Yolanda, and your voice that represents our future. The late John Lewis, Martin Luther King III, Reverend Al Sharpton, Tamika Mallory, and so many more, Jesse Jackson. Thank you. But let me just say today that I marched with the spirit of Fannie Lou Hamer as I crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge for the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. That is why I was arrested recently in the United States Senate for demanding the protection for our voting rights. I stand on Fannie Lou Hamer's shoulders. I stand on the shoulders of Shirley Chisholm, Coretta Scott King, Rosa Parks, and Dorothy Height. And Yolanda, you and my two grandchildren, Leah and Spencer, the new generation, and you're doing it your way. But let me say to you, you stand on our foundation. Together, we must tear down the walls of injustice against voting rights and insist that the Senate pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, because silence is not an option. The Congressional Black Caucus has called for the vote, demanding the Senate to take immediate actions on voting rights legislation. We will not yield our efforts to enshrine voting rights legislation into law, nor will we allow a filibuster to filibuster away our democracy and our voting rights. Today, we are speaking to a pained and frustrated nation. But tomorrow and the days to come, we will witness the Senate do its job to call for the vote. But let me say this loudly and clearly. We must draw the line in the sand of justice for any member not standing with us on voting rights. They are obstructionists to the America's promise of freedom and justice, and we must stand against them. The nation must join us and make some noise. Your father and grandfather said, lightning makes no noise, no sound until it strikes. Well, America, today let's make some noise. To this nation, let's stand up and strike back, fight for our voting rights. Lastly, the Congressional Black Caucus, the conscience of the Congress. I promise you that we stand with you. We stand with your father's dream. We stand with your courageous leadership, Speaker Pelosi, because you did your job. And I want the nation to know the House passed the Voting Rights Act. And so now, America, that's our power. That's our message from the Congressional Black Caucus. And in case you didn't know, I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I approve this message. God bless you. And now it gives me great honor and distinction to introduce a person who needs no introduction. I call her the Mother of Alabama. She is one who has led us with the late John Lewis across that Edmund Pettus Bridge. She is an author of Voting Rights, and it is my privilege to call her a friend, a proud member of the Congressional Black Caucus, a leader, the Honorable Congresswoman Terri Sewell.
I'm Congresswoman Terri Sewell, and I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District. It includes the historic cities of Birmingham, Montgomery, and yes, my hometown of Selma, Alabama. You see, voting rights is very personal to me. So many senators, so many legislators, and the King family join us year after year to walk across that bridge to commemorate what happened there on Bloody Sunday. And to say, no more. No more. We are once again at that precipice, an inflection point, if you will. While we no longer have to count how many marbles are in a jar or recite backwards the Declaration of Independence, today's modern-day voting suppression is no less pernicious. Long lines, purging of rolls. The list goes on and on. But today, as we honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy, it can't be a celebration, as Yolanda said, because we need legislation. We need the Senate to do its job. Almost 6 decades ago, John Lewis and the foot soldiers of the civil rights movement marched, fought, and yes, bled on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. Their efforts culminated in the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. And voting rights was never partisan until recently. The Voting Rights Bill passed 5 times for reauthorization under 4 Republican presidents. But now, we're having a problem called the filibuster. I agree with my colleagues. I agree with the King family. We cannot let a process stand in the way. A process, oh, by the way, that over 150 times have been set aside, and most recently by the raising of the debt ceiling. If we can raise the debt ceiling to protect the full faith and credit of the American government, surely we can pass the John Robert Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act to protect our democracy. I know people are tired and frustrated, and we can be tired and we can be frustrated, but what we can't do is give up. Just think what John Lewis, if he had given up, those marchers marching across that bridge, if they had been bludgeoned on that bridge and didn't try to go back for turnaround Tuesday or ultimately to complete that march. They didn't give up. They didn't give out. Think of Rosa Parks on a bus. Had she not given up, what our lives would have been. It was because of her courage, because of her sacrifice, that we now have integration in interstate transportation and commerce. So I say, let us remember the words of Coretta Scott King. She was profound and prophetic when she said, "Struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You have to earn it and win it in each generation." So this is our mountain moment. Will we give up, give out, or will we keep pressing forward? We must keep pressing forward. I want to say in closing that it's never lost on me that I get to represent my home district, my hometown of Selma, Alabama. My job each and every day is not only to represent the people, the wonderful people of Alabama's 7th Congressional District today, but it's also to protect and further the legacy of Selma, of Montgomery, of Birmingham. And I will not give up, and I will not give out. It was King, Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, if you cannot run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But we must keep moving forward. Let's move forward together and demand that the Senate pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Robert Lewis Advancement Act. Let's do it, and let's do it now. Thank you.
Today, we'd just like to thank Speaker Pelosi, Congresswoman Beatty from my hometown of Ohio, Congresswoman Sewell, and the entire King family for your leadership. There is no celebration without legislation. Thank you. We'll continue our program.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Now we have this morning, the King family, DC organizers, voting rights advocates cross the Frederick Douglass Bridge, a new landmark of access that our next speaker was instrumental in bringing to life. She also played a critical role in fighting for voting rights and DC statehood. I'd like to welcome my mayor, the DC mayor, Mayor Muriel Bowser.
Good afternoon, everybody. To the King family, to our honorable members of the Congress of the United States, and to my fellow Americans, good afternoon. I want to thank you for gathering today, Speaker Pelosi, of course, in our beautiful Washington, D.C., to honor the birthday and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King. We, of course, know that Dr. King played an integral role in desegregating America and helping us to get the Civil Rights Act. We cannot think of a better way to honor his legacy than to speak up, to take a stand, and to take action to ensure that Americans nationwide have their voices heard and counted. Across the nation, we know that states are passing anti-democratic, anti-voting bills, restricting the will of the people by the slimmest margins. I, like most Americans, find myself wondering what Dr. King would make of this moment we find ourselves in. It is a moment, sadly, that we're all too familiar with. What would he say about the inaction on the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which has already been ready for over a year? We know what he would say because he fought that fight his entire life. What would he say about a filibuster that stands in the way of protecting the most basic of American rights? Again, we know what he would say because he was fighting this fight 60 years ago. This fight, a fight for fundamental rights as Americans, the fight to make true the ideals of our democracy. And we know today that enough is enough. As President Biden said last month, we are standing at an inflection point in our democracy. Do we accept minority rule? Do we give up the dream of democracy in America? Do we give up on the idea of forming a more perfect union? Do we stand back and allow the minority to dig in its heels to preserve a system and ideals that are relics of the past?
and we say together, we can't and we won't. And I came here today to make sure that no one forgets about Washington, D.C., because we cannot talk about voting rights without talking about the disenfranchisement of 700,000 tax-paying Americans right here in Washington, D.C., a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow America. Today we're talking about the filibuster, but consider this. We wouldn't even be in this situation if Washington, D.C. had 2 senators, the 2 senators we deserve. Because you know what? Washington, D.C. stands with the majority of our fellow Americans who are in favor of expanding and protecting the right to vote. So don't forget, not only does the filibuster routinely silence the will of the majority, the will of the majority isn't even fully represented. And the plight of Washington, D.C. is the same plight that millions more Americans could find themselves in if we don't pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. Cut out from the democratic process and treated as second-class citizens. You will be expected to pay taxes, you will be expected to serve in the military, and you will be expected to follow the rules set by the Congress, Senator. Dr. King was unapologetic in his fight for racial justice, social justice, and economic justice. We cannot advance our democracy or build stronger communities if Americans do not have a say when decisions are being made and how funds are being distributed. So we're speaking up for voting rights, but also speaking up for the 700,000 people here who don't have a vote in their own Congress, in their own city. Thank you. So we are honored today to have a lot of our partners here. And so first I'd like to bring up Demario Cooper, who is the co-chair of the Center for Popular Democracy. Demario is an Ohio-based grassroots organizer with deep roots in both racial justice and electoral campaigning at the local level, state and national level. Demario?
As was said, my name is Demario Cooper. I'm from Akron, Ohio. I drove here last night in my car because I didn't want to get stuck in the airport. And it was a tough drive, you know. Some of it was like a lot of storms, like an actual winter storm. And other parts were smooth sailing. But I drove here. I got here this morning at 2 a.m. and I was like, I don't think I'm going to go to the march because I'm tired. But then something was like, Demario, get up and go to this march. All right, so I get up, I go to the march, I almost miss it, and then I end up in the back of the line when I get to the march. And right when we got to the Frederick Douglass Bridge, if y'all was there, the sun came out. Came out, didn't it? It came out for that moment. And when we left that bridge, the sun went away. If you was there, that's what really happened. As soon as y'all got to the front of that bridge, the sun came out. And it had me thinking that here I am on the bridge, Frederick Douglass's bridge, that has been renovated because before, if you know, that bridge didn't look like that. That was a little tiny bridge. It was old and dilapidated looking, and now it looks beautiful. It's restored. And we all standing on that bridge, and I was thinking about bridges, because I'm an organizer by trade. And bridges have a real strong history in my family. It's a legacy of bridges. My great-grandfather was killed on the bridge trying to go vote in Newport, Tennessee in 1925. That's a true story. And I was thinking about my grandfather on that bridge. And I was thinking about Martin Luther King talking about this long arc and that it bends towards justice. And here I am as a co-director of one of the largest grassroots networks in America on Martin Luther King Day, the day before we need to pass a Voting Rights Act, with my people, a diverse group of people, on this bridge. And organizers talk a lot about bridges. We talk about bridges like people need to move across the bridge in order for us to go from a private life to a public life. We talk about people moving across bridges to go from shame of individual feeling the oppression of this society to a collective dignity with others who are struggling with the same things, right? We talk about bridges all the time. We talk about bridges moving our people from accepting what's happening to us to moving into collective power, working together, building together, being in relationship together. I'm an organizer by trade. We need to move over bridges. Frederick Douglass moved over a bridge. He moved over a bridge when he decided that no longer he wanted to be an enslaved person and that he was going to be a free person. He made a decision point in the history of that man's life, made us have a person who taught us all that power gives nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. He learned that through crossing bridges. And on this day, where I do want to give thanks to the King family. I want to give a thanks to your grandfather. Your father has helped my life and all black people in this country's life. I want to give thanks to the ancestors, to the people who came and fought for us to have this freedom, for me to stand in front of Nancy Pelosi and the senators having this conversation. I'm a boy from Akron. I'm from the projects in Akron with a single mom. That's where I come from. And I ain't worried about it, I ain't scared about it, because I'm already on the dignity side of it. Today, we got to make a choice. And everything that's been said about the history of the Voting Rights Act and the filibuster and how the filibuster has been used to continue racial oppression, but today we got to make a choice. And I'm not talking to Cinema or Manchin. That's your job. Y'all do that. I'm an organizer. I'm talking to people. I'm an organizer. I talk to people. And what I want to say to the people is no matter what happens tomorrow, whether they do the right thing or they choose to do the wrong thing and hold up this historic, arcane system of oppression, especially right now, when we're in a clapback moment. We are in a clapback moment. If you are confused, go find out what happened during Reconstruction, and we are in that moment again. So it don't matter what they do tomorrow. Dr. King said, it's a long arc, but it bends towards justice. The force that bends that arc is us. Us and the Most High Creator is what bends that arc. And we got work to do. No matter if they do their job the right way tomorrow or not, we got work to do. The Center for Popular Democracy is here working with our affiliates across the nation. We are ready. We are ready to stand up, but we need our people to join us. It is that time. It is this time. There's a lot of bridges we got to cross. And it's time for us to cross the bridge from oppression and the history of oppression in this country to a country where everyone has the freedom to thrive, the freedom to live a dignified life, to not be stuck in shame and guilt. That requires us to build power. I want to thank y'all for giving me a second and allowing me to come speak, allowing the grandson of Jesse Elliott, who died on the bridge, trying to go vote, to speak to y'all today. I can feel my ancestors with me, and I know that it is time. I hope they do the right thing tomorrow, but if not, expect to hear from our communities. Expect for this not to just be something that you get to do and hide behind a filibuster or legislation. We are paying attention. We will be in the streets. We will protect our right. We will protect our rights and freedoms to thrive. And that's all I want to say. Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you, DeMario. And hey, DeMario, guess what? The sun comes out.
The sun does come out.
It does. Next, we will hear from Kelly Robinson, who is the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Action Fund. Kelly, please join us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Ooh, my glasses are a little foggy, but after hearing DeMario, the vision is clear, let me tell you. Hello, good people. My name is Kelly Robinson. I'm the Executive Director of Planned Parenthood Action Fund, and it is an honor to join the King family, Speaker Pelosi, Congresswoman Beatty, Congresswoman Sewell, and all of you here today. This is my first action back after the birth of my son, Isaiah, actually. He's 5 months old. And for me, the world has just changed. And so, I know y'all know what that means, but in so many ways, right? I mean, this world can feel so fundamentally broken with all that's happening around us, not only out in the world, but even in our own homes and our own families. Many of us are so worried about our kids, we're worried about our partners, our friends, our everyone around us. We're consumed by it. But what's clear to me now is that we are not broken by it. Now that I've had my son, I realize more than ever that we, the people that are fighting for freedom and justice, we don't have the luxury of letting a broken world break us. This crisis has once again laid bare the cracks in our democracy, but right now we have the power. We actually have the power to fix them, the power to ensure that America starts to fulfill her promise to us. So that's why I'm here today. I'm here because we have the power, and we've got to reaffirm it, because I am here because our power is actually in our vote. It's the power to build a better life for ourselves and our families. It's a power to elect representatives who actually understand the challenges facing our communities. It is the power that we need to make our own decisions about our health care, about our bodies, including the decision of whether or not to have an abortion. It's the power to heal just a little bit of this broken world for ourselves, for our kids, and for the legacy that we're moving forward. Y'all, voting rights and reproductive rights are inextricably linked. And right now, both are under attack. It's not an accident or coincidence what's happening right now, because access to sexual and reproductive health care cannot be achieved without a functioning democracy, one that represents the will of the people, full stop, period. And right now, that is just not happening. Many people today have spoken about the voting restrictions that are harming and being put forward across our country, state by state. But guess what? In many of those same states, we are also seeing them pass harsher and harsher abortion restrictions. And that's despite what the people want. That's despite the will of the people. We know that there's not a state in this country where banning abortion is possible. We know that 8 in 10 Americans support access to safe and legal abortion, and yet still, they continue to attack our bodies and our rights. This, my friends, is not a coincidence. This is the part of a concerted effort by extreme politicians to cling on to power by any means necessary. But guess what? We are not going to let that happen. We know that we are sitting here in a crisis moment where something can change. Congress needs to use every lever at their disposal to pass laws that protect and advance our right to vote and our rights to bodily autonomy. We need Congress to step up right now and protect our voting rights by passing the John R. Lewis Act now. We cannot let arcane Senate rules be more important than our freedom. The Senate has changed the rules before, and if Senate Republicans refuse to protect our democracy, then it's on the majority to change the rules so that everyone has the freedom to vote. This is the moment that will determine their legacy. So we're not asking, we are expecting and demanding action now. Because make no mistake, though we are in a crisis moment, if there's a silver lining about being in a crisis, it's that it's a moment of reckoning. It's a moment of transformation. It's a moment where greater change is possible moving forward than it was in the past. What an awesome opportunity for me and my friends, my family, and my colleagues backstage. What an awesome opportunity that we have to be a part of this change that has been generations in the making. So I have to say thank you to my little son, Isaiah. Thank you to Yolanda. Thank you to our families, to our ancestors, because you remind us to not only imagine that a better world is possible, but to use all of our power to fight for that world today. So thank you, and I'm excited to get to work.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker is a fierce social justice warrior, defender of education rights, an unrelenting advocate for all students and communities of color, and a valued and respected voice in the education arena. I have the privilege of introducing Becky Pringle, the president of the National Education Association. Becky?
Good afternoon. I stand here representing the 3 million members of this nation's largest labor union, the educators of the National Education Association. Our members share one important goal: ensuring that every student, everyone, has the access and opportunity and resources they need and deserve so they can boldly and completely live into their brilliance. For the members of the NEA, standing up for every student means standing against any effort to dismantle the voting rights that Dr. King fought so hard to secure. I thank the King family for bringing us here today. Speaker Pelosi, Representatives Beatty and Sewell, and so many others who are leading this fight across this nation for racial and social and electoral justice that are deeply woven into Dr. King's legacy. When COVID-19 began its spread across our country almost 2 years ago, the deep inequities that have existed in this country forever compounded and worsened its impact. As educators, we already knew that the students who suffer from those inequities the most are our Black and brown and indigenous students, are students who have been marginalized and underserved, are students from the very same communities where votes are being suppressed. My great-grandfather was enslaved not far from here in Charlottesville, Virginia. It's almost impossible to comprehend that the progress we've made since then is in jeopardy. But here we stand in 2022, on this day that we annually set aside to honor the legacy of Dr. King, calling on President Biden and Vice President Harris to demand that the Senate do what's right, do what it must to pass the Freedom to Vote and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Acts now. We will not allow Congress to set aside its responsibility to defend our democracy. Every eligible voter in this nation must have that responsibility to cast their ballots safely and freely. And they must be able to do that without partisan politicians sabotaging the results of our elections. I commit to you today that the NEA will continue to stand against voter suppression tactics that deliberately are designed to silence our voices and to diminish the power of the American people. We will work every single day, grounded in Dr. King's teachings, that every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice and struggle. This is no time for apathy or complacency. This is the time for vigorous action. Our collective action is the only way we will create that just society for our students and our families and our communities. Our our children, our babies, are depending on us to be worthy of them. I have no doubt that together we will. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, President Pringle. Now we have one of my sister friends, Melanie Campbell, who is the president and CEO of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation. She recently celebrated 25 years of service with the National Coalition and has served as an advisor to the U.S. President, congressional members, corporate, labor, and nonprofit executives, philanthropists, faith leaders, and many others on critical issues impacting Black America. Melanie?
Good afternoon. First, thank you to Martin and Yolanda and Andrea. Thank you all for your leadership. You all are really, I've just been following you all and how you all are taking and really shining the light that's needed. I'm standing here today with, I talk about this little young person to my right, who's my great nephew, Jeremiah, who's 10. And he decided he wanted to get involved in the movement. And so today he wasn't supposed to walk, and he said, Auntie, can I walk again? And so I do this. I can still do this. And when I heard you talk, it really did something the other day to my spirit to hear you talk about our young people, our children, and remind ourselves. And then this sister to my left of me, Mrs. Cora Masters-Berry, who's always going to be our First Lady of the District of Columbia and my mentor for the 25-plus years I've been here, who's one of the baddest political strategists I know. I stand with them. I ask them to come stand with me because at the end of the day, this fight that we're in, Dr. King said, the vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by human beings for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison people because they are different from others. And there's something about that quote, Martin, that's just been staying with me, and we've been really, it's been a rough road, and listening to Senator Sinema the other day made it that much harder. I was a part of a civil rights meeting with several civil rights organization leaders with Senator Sinema the other day. And sometimes it's not what you say, it's kind of how you bring it. And so the lack of sincerity about what we were really pleading her to understand the magnitude of the moment. And when we know that this vote, this attack on the vote goes much deeper, as this political scientist genius sister always remind us, why are we here? And this connection to what's happening with all of our rights being under attack. Cora said the other day, it's not about, it's really, yes, we have rights, but there's something that's borrowed because we have to continue to ask for this vote, to protect our vote, to be reauthorized. And it shouldn't be, but we're here. We're not going to give up. We're going to keep on fighting. No, we don't have the billy clubs and the hoses. But this country's at a place, at a breaking point. This issue is not just about black folks voting. This is about this democracy crumbling before our very eyes. I come out of Florida, a little place called Mims, Florida, Harry and Harriet T. Moore country, whose homes were bombed before I was even born in the 50s. That's where we're headed back to, because the element of violence in this country is escalating. We have a former president who keeps pushing it. And so the American people have to stand up. Those of us who are activists and organizers are going to keep fighting and keep pushing. But a year from now, I said it the other day, if we don't get this together, we're not going to recognize this democracy. And so the attack on voting rights, the attack on reproductive rights, even critical race theory, it's all connected because it's about us versus them and not we. So we, the people, will keep fighting. We will keep marching. We will keep protesting until we win. And those senators, I know there's at least 10 of y'all Republicans. In your spirit, you can do the right thing. Step on over to the right side of history. Step on to the right side of history so that Jeremiah and Yolanda and the children yet unborn will see an America as good as its ideals. Will see an America that will let this young man know he can walk the street, Martin. He can get in a car and not get shot. It's all connected. It is about justice. It is about opportunity. It is about freedom. So let's get this done, America. We can get it done. And challenge your senators to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. Before I bring up our next speaker, I just want to remind press that the King family will be available for interviews when we conclude, if you decide to speak with them. Next, we have Rana Epting, who is the Executive Director of Move On and leads both Move On Action, which works to advance progressive policies and social change on Move On political action, which works to elect candidates who are committed to standing up for an inclusive and progressive agenda. Rana?
Thank you, Ashley. It is an honor to be here with you both today, all three of you, Martin, Arndrea, Yolanda, as we honor the work and legacy of your father and grandfather. Thank you for having all of us and for your leadership. On behalf of the Move On community, millions of us all across this country who reside in every congressional district, in every state in this nation, on behalf of the millions of us that mobilized and organized to get out the vote in 2020, who overcame the threat of violence at the polls, who overcame and organized despite a global pandemic, who overcame and organized despite mass attempts at voter suppression. On behalf of all of us, I'm here to deliver a simple message to the United States Senate. History is watching. History is watching whether you will stand up and safeguard our democracy and our right to vote, or whether you shamelessly and cowardly hide behind the filibuster that has been used throughout history to deny our civil rights and our voting rights to our people. The choice today could not be more clear or more stark. We can safeguard our democracy, or we can have the filibuster, but we cannot have both. Every day that Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin enable the Republican filibuster of this bill is another day our democracy and our freedom to vote is under attack. Every day that Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin side with a Republican Party that has been hijacked by MAGA enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists is another day the forces seeking to undermine our democracy get even stronger. More than 400 anti-voter bills have been proposed at the state level. 400. 19 states have already passed bills that will make it harder to vote, and more are eagerly awaiting on the doorstep. The forces working to suppress our vote and undermine our democratic systems are acting with extreme urgency. These are the same forces that have stood behind some of America's greatest atrocities throughout history that we have talked about today. These are the same forces behind Donald Trump, as he spread the big lie and undermined the integrity of our election system. And these are the same forces that attacked our U.S. Capitol on January 6th. And I'm sad to say, today's Republican Party, they haven't denounced them. In fact, they have embraced these forces. I wish that wasn't the case, but that is the moment we are in. So this is not a normal time. This is not just another vote. This is not politics as usual. It cannot and it must not be politics as usual for us and for the Democrats in the U.S. Senate. Let's be real. Joining the Republicans in blocking this bill or joining with Republicans to seek compromise with the very forces seeking to destroy what we are working so hard to protect against does not protect the institution of the United States Senate. It furthers erosion of the entire American experiment. So Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, do not tell us you support this bill while simultaneously joining with the forces trying to block it. Do not tell us, do not insult us by posting quotes from the man we are here today to honor while actively working to undermine his work and his legacy. And most importantly, do not say the filibuster is some unbreakable rule and changing it will destroy the U.S. Senate. That is a self-serving, bold-faced lie, and everyone knows it. It is a distortion of our history. Just last month, Senator Sinema and Senator Manchin joined every Democratic senator to change the filibuster to pass the debt ceiling. Last month, they did the very thing they are now saying they cannot do. If it was good enough for the debt ceiling, it is sure good enough for our voting rights. History is watching. We are watching. Millions of us out there that worked so hard to win in this last election so that we could finally have this moment to safeguard our democracy and protect our right to vote. We are all watching today and every day. And as I said, we can either do the right thing and protect our democracy, or we can have the filibuster, but we cannot have both. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. We're going to hear now from Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright, who are the co-founders of Black Voters Matter. They work to increase power and marginalize predominantly Black communities through voter registration and outreach. Latasha and Cliff.
Good afternoon. I was so glad earlier when Martin III spoke and he talked about bipartisanship and some of the pitfalls and the contradictions that underlie the positions that certain senators as well as those in the media have about bipartisanship. Because at the end of the day in 1957 when Dr. King spoke and said, "Give us the ballot," he did not say that and ask for that thinking that one day we'd be asked to give up that ballot. And sacrifice that ballot at the altar of bipartisanship, to give up our votes at the golden calf of bipartisanship. That's not what he had in mind when he said, "Give us the ballot." And so it's appropriate that we talk about this today, especially today because on this day of all days, it's actually insulting that you got some folks that are asking us to accept a compromise, this thing called the Electoral Count Act, as if that is voting rights. But that is not what we've been asking for. You know, that would be the equivalent of if LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson, or the congressional leaders came to Dr. King and said, "You know what, Dr. King, we're not going to be able to pass this Voting Rights Act you're asking for. But here's what we got. After they finish keeping you from registering, after they finish making you take literacy tests, after they finish closing your polling places, after they finish having you count the jelly beans, this is what we got for you. We're going to make sure that the count of the votes that they do after that is accurate." That's what we got for you instead of voting rights. That's what we're being asked to accept today on this day. That's right. And that is insulting to us, just as it would have been insulting to Dr. King. But I'm not bitter about that. I'm not mad about that because this is what I know. I know that we got two things that those who are asking us to give up our rights, those that are passing voter suppression all across this country, we got two things that they're not ready for. We got two things. We got love and we got power. And Dr. King talked about these two things, and he reminded us that we need both of these things together because power without love is reckless and abusive. But love without power is sentimental and anemic. And what we know, what our history shows us, is when we combine those two things, we can do some mighty, mighty things. And so that's what we're about to do, you all. We are about to continue this fight, regardless of what some folks might say, what some pundits might say. We are going to continue. This process is not over until we say it's over. Just like the voting rights battle in Selma wasn't over until we defined that it was over. And so we're going to push on because what we know, and I've had a word on my heart for this past week, what we know is that if we grow not weary in well-doing, then in due season we shall reap, if we faint not. And that's what I'm asking of our people. That's what I'm asking of those who believe in freedom. We shall not rest. If we faint not, we can do some mighty, mighty things. If we faint not, we can do the same thing that those folks in Montgomery, Alabama, that Dr. King led on a year-long bus boycott. If we faint not, we can get a victory. If we faint not, we can do the same thing as those people in Selma and the Black Belt of Alabama and all across the country, where not once, not twice, but 3 times they had to try to do a march to go from Selma to Montgomery. They made it there because they what? They faint not. And so I'm here to tell you today that we are going to get the freedom to vote and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act because we are going to faint not. We are going to push, and in due season, we shall reap. This is that season. Thank you.
We come this far by faith, and we are leaning on the Lord, and we are trusting in His holy word, 'cause He's never failed me yet. Oh, can't turn around. We've come this far by faith. Amen. I'm coming because I think that we also have to recognize that Dr. King, more than anything, was a man of faith. That at the end of the day, when we're talking about our strategies, we have to combine that with the spirit of the movement. When the spirit of you rise up, we can literally change and transform anything in this country. Let me tell you what spirit can do. There were only 600 people that actually were at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. They didn't have a lot of power. They didn't have politics on their side. They didn't have a political party representation. There were the Republicans and the Dixiecrats. And everybody told them, it ain't going to happen. You need to give up. You need to stop. Matter of fact, so much so that eventually Dr. King actually wrote and had to tell people around him why we can't wait. And I'm coming to remind you on this day that in the spirit of the movement, we have come this far by faith, right? And we're not going to turn around. We're actually going to transform this country to be what it deserves, that we deserve and we desire. I'm going to ask everybody just for a quick second, because I know I don't have long, but I ask everybody just to close your eyes on this day. Close your eyes for a second. I'm going to ask you a question. My question to you is, what would America look like without racism? I ask that question because that's the vision. That's the vision that I'm standing on and that I believe in. At the end of the day, aren't we tired of the lies? Aren't we tired of being divisive? Aren't we tired of folks being in position of power while the rest and the masses of us want something? What do we want? We all want a better lives for our children. We all want quality education. We all want health care. We all want to be treated with dignity and respect. So I stand today on this podium in the spirit of the movement. And in the spirit of the movement, when you combine that with strategy, you can't lose. And so I want to remind you of who we are and whose we are in this moment. We can win, you all. We can win. Don't listen to what the pundits say. Everything was pointing to, including the president in 1965, that they could not win. Yet they persisted, right? Because when you recognize that there's a greater power here, I do believe that there is a level of decency in Republicans in this country and Democrats in this country, people identify themselves as a Green Party and independent. There is enough of us to actually change the tide. I'm just asking you to stand up in this moment, stand in integrity in this moment, stand in the space of truth, stand for the love of humanity, and I guarantee you we can move beyond a transaction of a bill and we can transform this America to be the America that is laid out in the Constitution. Thank you. We've come this far by faith, leaning on the Lord, and we will not turn around.
Let the church say amen. Okay. Thank you, Latasha and Cliff. We can win. Our next speaker is Joy Chaney. She is the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau and Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the National Urban League. The National Urban League is a historic civil rights and urban advocacy organization with 90 affiliates serving 300 communities, providing direct service that impacts and improves the lives of more than 2 million people nationwide. Joy?
Protocol having been established, I want to thank the King family and the other organizers for inviting the National Urban League today. My name is Joy Chaney, and I'm the Executive Director of the Washington Bureau at the National Urban League. And I bring you greetings on behalf of Mark Morial, the President and CEO of the National Urban League, who is representing the Urban League movement at MLK Day events in New York today. He will be asking there what I am asking you right now. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? This is the singing portion of today's program. It is the same question that the 91 affiliates of the National Urban League are asking the senators who represent them in more than 37 states and more than 300 communities across this nation. But because the National Urban League movement, through our young professionals and our guild members, span every state in this union, it is the same question we are asking all senators, all 100, Republican, Democratic, Independent, Progressive, Conservative, and Moderate. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? It is the same question the president asked in Atlanta this past week. It is the same question that some feel is too hot, too divisive, too uncomfortable. But in the battle for our very democracy, it is the only question that really matters. Which side are you on? Which side are you on? It only feels uncomfortable because the stakes are so high, because the answer of which side you should be on is so clear. This isn't a minor matter upon which good people can disagree. When the question is, are you on the side of the right to vote for all Americans, or are you on the side of those who would block that right for political and cynical and, yes, racist reasons? There is only one legitimate answer. You have to be for the right to vote, the right upon which all other rights depend. We are a democracy. That doesn't exist fully if everyone doesn't have equal access to the franchise. So when we ask which side are you on, we are asking if you are on the side of America and of Americans. This isn't even about politics and gamesmanship. I'm sick of hearing that. I'm not here because I want one party or another to win. It's more important than that. It's more fundamental than that. If everyone can't vote, if people are cheated out of being able to have their voices heard, we all lose in a democracy. I'm here because I want everyone to have easy and equal access to the ballot box, to have the opportunity to be represented in the halls of power. Young people, old people, Black people, Latino people, Asian people, people with disabilities, people in rural America, people in urban America. Fight for the hearts and minds of voters. Fight about policy, but not about their very right to vote. Fighting their right to vote in a democracy is fundamentally immoral. It is wrong, and it is a word I don't like to use often, but it is evil. And so when we ask, what side are you on? Senators, which side are you on? We are asking, are you on the side of right and wrong, good and evil? Next week, all senators, not just Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Look, I'm disappointed too, more than some might know. I worked in the Senate. We've met with both of them. I'm disappointed. I'm frustrated because they voted to change the Senate rules for lesser matters, economic matters, other matters, but not for the most important matter before us, the right to vote. But it's not just about them. It's about Senator Mitch McConnell. It's about Senator Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and the more than a dozen other Republican senators who previously supported voting rights, but who in this Trumpian era in the Republican Party, this era of insanity, are declining to do so now. Maybe they're afraid. I don't know. We only need Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema because Republicans refuse to stand up for what's right, for what's democratic, for what's American, even though the vast majority of Americans support voting rights in this country and the bills before them. But next week, it's not too late. Everyone will have a chance to get right with the American people, to get on the right side of history, to get on the right side of right. They will have a chance to vote for the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, for a standard of voting that ensures the right to vote and the integrity of our elections nationwide, coast to coast, everyone. So let's get around to the filibuster, and let's get on to the bill. Put it to an up or down vote and let the majority decide. Are you for voting rights or are you not? And all of us in the National Urban League movement, throughout the nation, all of us in this room and who can hear the sound of my voice, and throughout the span of history, past, present, and future, including, especially, Dr. King, we'll be watching what you do. We speak with one voice in asking you, which side are you on? Which side are you on? Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Reverend Liz Theo-Harris is an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, a teacher at Union Theological Seminary in New York City, and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, which is working towards a moral revival that is necessary to save the heart and soul of our democracy. Reverend Theo-Harris.
Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebrated his last birthday calling for immediate action to address racism, poverty, and militarism, drawing the connection between voting rights and economic justice, building a poor people's campaign. Today, there is no other way to honor Reverend Dr. King than to protect and expand voting rights, abolish the filibuster, raise wages, expand health care, and invest in our children and families. And as Yolanda Renee King said, to take action together. As Ashley said, my name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. I'm the director of the Kairos Center and the co-chair alongside the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber II of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival that is organizing poor and low-income people, moral leaders and activists of every age and race and religion and gender and geography in nearly every state of these yet-to-be United States. As Reverend Dr. King said just months before he was shot down, there is nothing wrong with a traffic law which says that you have to stop for a red light. But when a man is bleeding to death, The ambulance goes through those red lights at top speed. There is a fire raging now for the poor of this society. Disinherited people all over the world are bleeding to death from deep social and economic wounds. They need brigades of ambulance drivers who will have to ignore the red lights of the present system until the emergency is solved. With fewer voting rights today than people had more than 50 years ago, despite people dying for those rights, with a rolling coup taking place in state legislatures across the country, working to diminish the power of a multiracial democracy rising up, with 140 million people who are poor and low income in this, the richest country in the world, and a third of the nation's electorate poor and low income, the nation is in desperate need of ambulance drivers who are prepared to run through the red lights of the present system, to protect voting rights, to abolish the filibuster, to invest in the infrastructure of our democracy and our daily lives. We must run through the red lights of closed polling places and redistricting and all forms of voter suppression. We must run through the red lights of poverty and homelessness and low wages and unemployment and abandonment in the midst of abundance. The red lights of senators who would rather listen to their wealthy corporate donors than to the demands of the people. Yes, we as a people, from the hood to the holler, from the Bronx to the border, from the California coast to the Carolinas, today on MLK Day and every day, are signing up to be ambulance drivers, readying ourselves to save the heart and soul of our democracy. We're going to push to pass voting rights, establish DC statehood, and end the filibuster, but we will not stop there. We're going to litigate in the courts and push in the legislature and engage in moral direct action in the streets to defend this democracy, to promote economic justice, to save the earth, to demilitarize our communities, to confront Christian nationalism, and to lift from the bottom so that everybody can rise. And we'll be here in DC on June 18th for a Poor People and Low-Wage Workers Assembly, a moral march on Washington and to the polls as we continue to build power. As poor and impacted leaders in states across the country have been saying, our deadline is victory. Let's move forward together and not one step back. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Theo Harris. Our next speaker is Ramon Cruz, who is the president of Sierra Club, the nation's largest grassroots environmental movement with millions of members across the country. Mr. Cruz?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. My name is Ramon Cruz, and I'm the president of the Sierra Club, the nation's oldest and largest environmental organization. And I'm honored to share a podium with the King family, Speaker Pelosi, and other allies in our shared fight for justice. On behalf of the millions of our members and supporters, we urge the Senate to honor Dr. King's legacy by protecting our democracy and the freedom to vote. There is no excuse for the Senate to delay passing the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act even one more day. You may ask why there is an environmental organization here today. Well, we know that voting rights are environmental rights, are justice rights, are human rights. As a Puerto Riqueño, I know firsthand how a lack of democracy paves the way toward environmental destruction and negligence. When a major climate disaster like Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico, the former administration felt entitled to refuse our calls for help that were so desperately needed. Being deprived of political power is the first step to environmental racism and to being disenfranchised and not accessing the resources necessary for a strong economic development, recovery, and equality. This is not what true democracy looks like. We need a robust representative democracy to ensure that our demands for clean, healthy environments and safety from the climate crisis are heard in the halls of power. But time and again, Leader McConnell and the Republican Party have exploited the filibuster to block progress on climate action, equal pay, raising the minimum wage, and to stop Congress from protecting our most fundamental freedom in a democracy, the freedom to vote. The only way around this extreme obstruction is for Democrats to change the filibuster rule. All but 2 Democrats are committed to this. We now need Senators Manchin and Sinema to stand on the right side of history and do whatever it takes to preserve our right to vote. The choice in front of every senator is a simple one. How do you want to be remembered? Senators can choose to preserve the Jim Crow relic known as the filibuster, or they can choose to preserve millions of Americans' voting rights instead. They cannot do both. They can't. So this Martin Luther King Day, we call on our senators to be on the right side of history and do whatever it takes to pass the Freedom to Vote John R. Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act. History, the American people, are watching and will judge them. Gracias.
Next, we have Stephanie Young, Executive Director of When We All Vote, a national nonpartisan initiative on a mission to change the culture around voting and increase participation in democracy. Stephanie?
Thank you, Ashley. And good afternoon. My name is Stephanie Young, and I'm the Executive Director of When We All Vote, a nonpartisan organization launched by former First Lady Michelle Obama, and we are on a mission to change the culture around voting and to increase participation in each and every election. Thank you to the King family for inviting When We All Vote to be a part of this moment. Thank you to Speaker Pelosi and the CBC Chair Joyce Beatty and Representative Terri Sewell for their leadership on Capitol Hill, and all of the partners here today. My late father, Bishop McKinley Young, pastored Big Bethel AME Church just down the street from Auburn Avenue, which is where Ebenezer Baptist Church is, in Atlanta, Georgia. And he taught me that faith without works is dead. I have faith in our democracy, but we have to work to keep it. From growing up to Atlanta to apartheid Cape Town, South Africa, I learned that saving democracy has never been led by the people in power. It has been led by us, the people, and it starts in our communities. Today, I stand representing Michelle Obama and the over 500,000 people that we helped to get registered and turn out to vote in 2020, the 25,000 voting squad captains who volunteered, registered, and turned out voters, people like Capricia in DC at Black Lives Matter Plaza and Addison in Florida, and those who stepped up to be poll workers doing their local elections, and the hundreds and thousands of supporters representing When We All Vote, to join our partners here to tell the Senate, and particularly Manchin and Sinema, and all who stand in the way of progress, to pass the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, once and for all, for the sake of our democracy. The American people did their part, and they deserve a Senate who believes in democracy and leaders who will protect them and their work for their best instead of their best interests. Not to mention 83% of Americans support federal voting rights legislation, while the minority of the Senate has blocked or filibustered our progress. Let us release ourselves from the chains of the filibuster that block any progress. It has no basis in the Constitution, and it has a racist and a very present past. Last Sunday, When We All Vote published a full-page ad in the New York Times, joined by 31 organizations representing millions of Americans, to pledge to recruit and train 100,000 volunteers, register more than 1 million new voters, organize at least 100,000 Americans to contact their senators to fight for federal voting legislation and more. Dr. King's words ring truer more now than ever. Let us march on the ballot boxes until somehow we will be able to develop that day when men will have food and material necessities for their bodies, freedom and dignity for their spirits, and education and culture for their mind. No matter what happens, this is not over, and When We All Vote remains in the fight. November is coming, and we're getting ready. We are committed not only to registering thousands of people to vote, but to educate them about the importance of every elected office, from school boards to judges to governors and their secretaries of state. So to the Senate, history has its eyes on you. Pass the Freedom to Vote and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act once and for all. The fight continues. Fight on. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll now hear from Taifa Smith Butler, the president of Demos, a dynamic think tank that powers the movement for a just, inclusive, and multiracial democracy.
Good afternoon. First, I would like to give honor to the King family and to Dr. King's legacy that lives on in the Drum Major Institute and in many of you. As it's been said, my name is Taifa Smith Butler, and I am pleased to represent Demos, a think tank that is focused on advancing and building a just, inclusive, multiracial democracy and economy. And we do that by centering racial equity and the voices and the lives of Black and brown people in this country who have been historically excluded. In the faith tradition that I'm in, I'm reminded of a song, since Latasha has already sung today. Been running with Jesus a long time, and I'm not tired yet. And we've been talking about voting rights a long time today, and I'm not tired yet. And as I stand here today near the end of this program to amplify and echo the need for us to not celebrate Dr. King's legacy while states around this country legislate voter suppression in the form of these laws that we've seen over the last year. We cannot allow them to do this unchecked, unaccountable, and unabashed like this is normal. I mean, really, what kind of gaslighting is going on here? We must stand firm as I come today from Georgia, representing the movement leaders who fought to register and expand our electorate, to motivate and energize people to not only show up at the polls, but believe that their civic duty and their power could make a difference. And when it did make a difference, when Georgia showed up and elected our first Black senator, our first Jewish senator, lawmakers in Georgia then choose to change the rules. They rewrite the rules to make it so that it's criminal to provide food and water to people standing in long lines. They changed the rules to make it so that there's less drop boxes and shorter hours, I should say. They're rewriting the rules, and it is not about rules, it is about power, and it is about control. And I'm excited today that we are here to demonstrate people power. And so, as you know, it is not just Georgia. You've heard it all day today. It's Texas, it's Florida, where they are banning mail-in ballots unless, or actually laws that ban mail-in ballots unless voters specifically request one. It's laws in 19 states across this country that are chipping away at the very foundation of our democracy. And it doesn't stop at the ballot box. We have to understand that these efforts to also undermine our ability to show up and protest and our freedom of voice is at risk. Our ability to teach our children the truth about American history is on the line today. Make no mistake, there is a coordinated, systematic effort, state by state, to attack the fundamental right to vote today. And that attack warrants immediate federal action. My Shiro, Shirley Chisholm, said, "You don't make progress standing on the sidelines whimpering and complaining. You make progress by implementing ideas." Well, we have an idea on the table today, an idea that we must advance in this defining moment in this country's history. And that idea is the Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Act, named after a man who spent nearly 3 decades of his remarkable life representing the people of Georgia here in Washington. It is the last great hope of our democracy. The idea of national standards on automatic and same-day voter registration, expanding vote by mail, baselines for early voting days, preventing partisan gerrymandering, and so much more. These are the ideas that are sound and will strengthen our democracy, not restrict access to it. So Congress has a duty to defend the right to vote today, to stand against these unlawful voter purges, to guard against the discriminatory state-level anti-voter laws, and to do anything less is nonfeasance. I can think of no better way that Congress can honor Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who called for justice, equality, and spoke about the fierce urgency of now, than to act on these bills today, tomorrow, this week, now. And unless and until they do, we cannot back down. And we'll be talking about voting rights for a long time, and we're not tired yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Taifa. Our last speaker on the program, we'll hear from Virginia K. Solomon, who has led the League of Women Voters since 2018. As the CEO of the League of Women Voters, Virginia builds upon her vision for an inclusive democracy where every person in America has the ability and opportunity to participate and advocate for the issues that matter to them. Virginia?
Good afternoon. I know everyone's been here for some time, so thank you. I want to give a special thanks to the King family for bringing us together and for sharing their father's legacy with us today. We're gathered here as a community to pay tribute to a man who dedicated his life to service and justice for all. And it is in his footsteps that the fight for voting rights continues. See, we wish we didn't have to be here. Let's make it clear, we don't want to have to be here today, but we must. Because we have a Senate that refuses to pass bipartisan voting rights legislation. And in absence of that bipartisanship, we have 2 senators who are refusing to remove the filibuster as a barrier to this legislation. So now we find ourselves in a historic moment that will define the future of America. Will we become an autocracy, or will we remain a democracy? A recent Quinnipiac poll said that 6 out of 10 Americans believe that our democracy is on the brink of collapse. And there's good reason for that. We have seen our Capitol attacked in an attempt to overturn a free and fair election. We've heard lies spewed in order to sow seeds of distrust. We've seen threats of harm to election workers. We've seen anti-voter bills passed around the country that will limit the ability of voters to cast their ballots. And we've seen gerrymandered districts all throughout the country, ensuring that Black and brown voters' votes will not matter. So these threats, they are real to the future of America. These aren't fake. This is not imagined. But despite this, despite all of these threats, we have hope. We have hope because we know that it is never, never too late for these senators to change their minds. And we will do everything in our power to get them to do just that, to change their minds. Senators Manchin and Sinema, there is no shame in changing your mind. Superman even changed his mind. There's no reason why you can't. And we know we are on the side of justice. We know we are on the side of morality, and we know that we are on the side of democracy. And so we ask you to join us and change your mind. And that is why we take this day, a day that honors the legacy of Dr. King and all the freedom fighters who came before him. Not just to mark how far we've come, but to rally and to lift our voices, to commit ourselves anew to the fight for democracy. And this includes the fight for DC statehood, which is a civil rights issue, which cannot be separated from the fight for democracy and voting rights. Congressman John Lewis, he said that democracy is not a state, it is an act. And when we gather together as we have today, when we protest, when we advocate, when we vote, we are performing the act of democracy in action. Do you want to know what democracy looks like? This gathering today, the people here today, the actions and the deeds that people engage in today, this is what democracy looks like. We are not a nation of naysayers, and the folks who came here today are not alarmists, nor are we part of the Democratic Party, at least the activists here. We are a movement of believers and doers. We put ourselves on the front lines to build a more perfect union for all. So when our communities are pushed out of the voting process, we fight. When our seniors can't access the polls safely, we fight. And when communities are deliberately neglected or denied voting access, we fight. And now we need the Senate to fight for us. When we stand collectively in our power as we do today, we can create real change and progress that is long, long overdue. This fight isn't about today. It's been going on for some time. Make no mistake. And that is why we are calling on the Senate to protect our sacred right to vote. They must deliver for our democracy. It is about our future. It is about the future of our children. And it will require clarity and moral courage. And those in the Senate must do what's right, especially Senators Manchin and Sinema. Be our superheroes and change your mind. History will remember this moment, and history will remember who allowed our democracy to collapse or who saved it. Each of these senators must now choose which side they are on. And we hope they will choose right. Thank you all so very much.
Thank you, Virginia. Now, for the press in the room, we are going to take 3 or 4 questions from the King family, so they will join us back on stage for a short question and answer portion.
Okay, we'll be happy to take a few questions, and I'll let Joel will identify whomever. If you state who you are, please, just so we know.
The gentleman to our right.
Okay, I heard CNN, but I don't see.
Hi,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay.
If the Senate does not pass this, what is your next step? What's the next step?
Well, today our focus is getting the nation galvanized, and we'll have to see what happens. A lot is going on here and across the nation today. And so none of us know what the outcome is, but what we know is our focus is today.
Hello, Jenny from Associated Press. How can we galvanize the young people across the country for activism this week if it doesn't pass tomorrow? What would your message be?
Is that for you, Yolanda?
Would you like?
Okay. Wait, the question is, how, like, if it doesn't pass tomorrow, how do we continue
How do we
Yeah.
galvanize young people?
Well, we're going to have to keep writing to our elected officials and keep planning and spreading messages of awareness and educating people. Just because something doesn't get done exactly how we want it to doesn't mean that you give up. You have to keep on going, and you have to have perseverance. And that's when the perseverance really comes in, and I think that's really a keen skill to being an activist. You have to learn how to persevere and keep on going and keep on going. So for young people who don't know what they're going to do if this bill does not pass, well, you have to keep going, keep on doing what you're doing. Many of my grandfather's campaign weren't just 2-month campaigns. They were quite long-term. And so I think it's so important that you have perseverance, and you have to use that as your guide. You have to use that as your blueprint, and to keep doing what you're doing and having faith and hope.
And let me add something. That's extraordinarily powerful, what she's saying, which the other thing is, in 1964, Dad went in to see President Johnson, and he told Dad, when Dad said, we need a Voting Rights Act now, Mr. President, and Dr. King, we're out, we're fresh out, we have nothing, we cannot do anything for you. So when Dad and his team were leaving the White House, Dad said to those who were with him, who asked Dr. King, what are we going to do now? Well, number one, we have to precipitate a nonviolent crisis so that the Congress will have to respond to us. Of course, Selma came, and therein was the opportunity for the president to sign the bill after Congress passed the bill. My only point is, we just never know what is going to happen. I fought for years to get the Confederate flags brought down, specifically in South Carolina. When I was president of SCLC, we boycotted and chose not to do our convention that year. Tragically, 9 members of a church, Mother Emanuel, the pastor, Reverend Pinckney, who was the state senator and close to Governor Nikki Haley at the time, they would not remove that flag. Tragically, after 9 people were killed, the flag was removed. Just last year, a year and a half ago now, tragically, the death of George Floyd, where we had demonstrations in every state in our nation and all over the world. All of a sudden, the relics of Confederate generals have come down all across this nation, and those relics who owned slavery all over the world. So my point is, we don't always know what is going to be the catalyst, but what we know is, as my wife said earlier, we're not going to give in, we're not going to give up, we're not going to give out.
Hi, Rachel Scott with ABC. Thank you so much for your time. Senator Manchin has released a statement today honoring your father and your grandfather's life. Senator Sinema has also put out a tweet. Do you think that goes far enough, putting out a statement commemorating the life of Dr. Martin Luther King? And what would your message be to each of them in these final hours ahead of that critical vote tomorrow?
You want to try it? Okay. First of all, I would say that, it's kind of frustrating for people to be releasing statements and you really have not totally adhered to my father's ideals. My father not only gave his life, but he fought for the right to vote. And he and others gave their lives. And again, Senator Manchin says he supports the bill, but he won't move or has not so far moved on a pathway to say that there's a pathway forward. So my hope and my message to him would be, Senator, you got to go further. You can't say I'm for something but don't have a pathway to it. And that's anybody who's talking about Dad today, because I'm sure many senators also on the Republican side who ought to be ashamed of themselves who have shut down the process for voter expansion, voter protections. So that's the first thing I would say.
And I would ask them the same thing that I asked in my statements earlier. If, in fact, they want to celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr., I would ask them to think about their own constituents, but I also would ask them to think about Dr. King's granddaughter, Yolanda, who was born in 2008. In 2013, as I said earlier, with the Voting Rights Act being dismantled, which was the cornerstone of her grandmother's legacy. And then last year with Georgia being one of the states that passed regressive and suppressive legislation. And so I would ask them to think about tonight in these final hours, and I would imagine that they will say their nightly prayers, as many do, before they fall asleep tonight. And for them to really think about, as they typed in or thought about the words of Martin Luther King Jr., is this the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. had for his granddaughter and for her peers, for them in their 13 short years to have less voting rights than the day that they were born?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Again, we want to thank the King family. Also want to thank all the folks who helped plan this event, and particularly Stasha Rhodes on the side. So much work goes to putting these efforts together. I want to thank all the speakers for joining us to mark today, MLK Day holiday, for an urgent call to action. As you heard today, tomorrow the U.S. Senate will take on voting rights legislation, and they need to hear from you all right now. Call your senators and visit deliverforvotingrights.com. That is deliverforvotingrights.com to find ways to take action to honor our civil rights giant, Dr. King. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our program.